when we vilify the perpetrator, what we're really doing is creating a negative cycle. And we're thinking that that person, and we begin to criticize that person's character. And then we're off in the weeds. It doesn't really work. We've often talked that compassion is doesn't discriminate, and this is a part of that process. When we're taking a look at something we've done that didn't work out, or we did something that we regret, and we're criticizing our character, then that's sort of labeling. I am this, or I was stupid, or I am, then we begin that cycle of criticism, and it never really works out because we can't be accountable if we're blaming ourselves all the time. So I'm a terrible person, or we begin to label ourselves and our actions, and it sets up this very negative relationship with ourselves. And I had someone recently when I was teaching meditation, and I asked her what was going on, and she said, well, she had all these negative thoughts about herself coming up, and she tried to push them away. And we talked about it some more, and she's a yoga instructor and the whole bit. And what struck me was, and we talked about this a little bit, she had a very adversarial relationship with herself. That those things were bad and wrong. This was bad and wrong about me. This is terrible about me. And I've got to I couldn't handle it, and she couldn't handle it all at once, because, when we're meditating, we're open and we're relaxed. Our compensation programs are relaxed. Stuff comes up, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. And so the idea is when we're in the mindfulness practice, is to allow it to come up, because that's what we need to know and deal with. But if we immediately respond to, oh, that's terrible, then we're going to get stuck in this negative loop. It just is. And this is why I go back time and time again. I find this with just any kind of situation I have with clients and even family, is that what's going on in our mind and our personality is not our fault. It's just not our fault at all. It's something that we've inherited. Because if we take a close look at our family tree and how we were raised, we were taught that we were dumb or stupid, or that the world was a terrible place and we got to watch out and we got to get them before they get us, or I'm worthless and you better just keep quiet, or whatever it is. Then that's just stuff that we inherited. And I look more toward what the upbringing was like, and in detail, what did the parents pass on to their kids. And parents pass on things genetically, that some things transfer automatically, like mental health issues, or a really fundamentally positive outlook on life, that we're okay just the way we are, or something more difficult to deal with, and that's reinforced with the parenting. Because ideally, when you take a look at the ideal parenting process, it really becomes really clear. I think I told this story once before. I was in Europe, and I was in France, and I was walking behind this mom with her young son. Yeah, I have told this before. With her young son, and he was just tall enough for, he had his hand straight up, and she was holding his hand as they were walking. And as they were walking, he stumbled and fell and hit his knee. It was winter, so he didn't break the skin or anything. And she just automatically said in a very kind voice, says, "Oh, you fell." I said, "Yeah, I fell." And he says, "Are you okay?" As they continued to walk. And he said, "Yeah, I'm okay." It wasn't, idiot, you stumbled. Don't ever do that. Hold my hand and watch where you go. It wasn't any of that stuff, right? So at those kinds of junctures, particularly when we're young, our life can take a very different tack. When we had disappointment, when we had loved ones die, let's say our favorite grandparent or aunt or uncle passed away, and it's really important what parents say to their kids. And so parents pass on everything that they have. They don't have a non-judgmental outlook. They're going to pass on a judgmental outlook. And if they don't have this feeling that we develop in here of, I don't know how I'm going to handle this, let's see. Or then instead they give them, oh, this is terrible, this is your fault, this is, or what's even worse, they don't talk to the kid about it at all. So when something happens, they get a bad grade, or they mess up, or they get, they got bullies at school or whatever, and the parents don't offer any advice, that's even worse, because that means child, number one, feels completely alienated and completely alone, and that they have to figure out on their own how to deal with this, and they can't because they don't have the tools to do that. And so they grow up being susceptible to being bullied because they don't have the skills to do that. There's a wonderful talk by a woman who is in Al-Anon for many, many, many years. And the talk is old. It was back in the 80s, so it's been around a while. It's called the Blessing Talk, Blessing Tape. And she was talking about how in healthy families, the blessing of the parents gets passed on to the children. And in unhealthy families, the blessing does not get passed on to the children because the parents didn't have it themselves. And so what happens with children is they go kind of lost in life. They don't have this groundedness, and they don't have this sense of direction and orientation and connection with themselves. And within the context of Al-Anon, I don't know, some of y'all may not know, both AA and Al-Anon. Al-Anon is for the family members and loved ones of people who have a problem with drugs and alcohol. So, but in the fellowship is very, very strong in both programs. It's an essential part of recovery is this fellowship of people who care for and support each other, like day in and day out. And she said, well, fortunately in Al-Anon, even though they didn't get the blessing from their parents, they can get the blessing from the fellowship. And that's one of the reasons why I emphasize the need for community, because community can help us heal those deficits from our childhood. And we all have them. I don't know anyone who is raised in an ideal situation and didn't really need much to go on and live life. It's the parents gave us what they can, and that's what we get. So we don't know how to do something or how to handle anxiety or depression or setbacks or failures, and all of which are just part of the human experience. We get kind of stuck because we don't know how to handle it. So through this continuing to develop this relationship with our authentic self, we begin to develop the ability to intuitively handle life's difficulties, navigate them intuitively. Really, from another perspective, when parents, the more the parenting gets toward the ideal, let me put it that way, what the parent is really doing is helping the child develop this connection with their authentic self, so that when they grow up, they can rely upon that to grow even further. And because no parent, as I've said before, no parent can parent 100%. There's always going to be something missing. That's why grandparents and aunts and uncles are there. I've seen families that when I have someone, even if they're like in their 30s or something, I'll ask them if they're having a really hard time. I said, is there anyone in the family that you know of who knows all the secrets And very often there's one person, an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, that knows all the secrets. And I said, well, go talk to them. Ask them about this and ask them about that. And the way it's turned out is really well. So the person can find out what they didn't get. I had one client, and I've been working with her for a long time, and I gave her an assignment once. I said, write down, because she was so stuck in her family system, which was not good. Anyway, I told her to write down everything that she did not get growing up. That was a little difficult, but she did it, and it was very, very helpful because you realize it's not my fault. This is nothing to blame myself for, that I don't know how to do this or don't know how to do that. I wasn't taught that. Now, that doesn't mean I can sit back and blame them for the rest of my life. That's not the idea here. Then just keep us stuck. It's to say, oh, yep, that's a mess. I didn't get that. I gotta learn that. I'm going to understand that better. I want to understand that better, how to do X, Y, and Z, or whatever it is, how to manage my nervous system, or how to find guidance in life. And, because I have another client, a young woman, terrible parent, passive but terrible parenting, and disoriented, completely. She doesn't know what to do. All her friends are going off and have boyfriends and their degrees and getting jobs and stuff, and so I asked her, I said, is there anything that you do or have done that really brings you a sense of joy? And she said, yeah. And it was singing. She loved to sing. And so I said, well, start singing. And she said, well, how do I? And I said, you'll work it out. You know some musicians, and you go to karaoke or whatever, and she's been going to karaoke, and it's she's fine. That's her connection with her authentic self. It was down to just a little trickle because she was trying to solve this problem and that problem, and that's just, you can't, it doesn't work. And so she's now singing on a regular basis and meeting a whole new set of friends because she's tuning into her authentic self. In that situation, to illustrate, it wouldn't do her any good whatsoever to blame her parents or blame this or blame. We could have gone into detail on how she was parented and in exactly what her relationship is like with her parents and what she got and what she didn't get and how terrible it was, and even though it didn't seem bad at the time and all that. But with her, I just decided that, no, she just needs to know that she needs to find her own way in her connection with her authentic self, and the rest she'll figure out. If she can get that and develop that and become involved in that, she'll figure all the rest of the stuff out. She has severe anxiety disorder, panic disorder. She's been making progress, and it's just amazing when we start tuning into this authentic self. What we got or didn't get, and those are things that it's not just from parenting; it's also from our culture. My parents' culture was such that there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't work for me at all, but some of it does. So we're able to take a look at what our family culture was like and the culture that they came from, because cultural patterns are, Native Americans, and I think in the Bible too, they talk about that our actions have an effect 7 generations down the line, and we're affected by the previous 7 generations. And that's why in many cultures there's a lot of practices related to our ancestors. Not only to be able to get the good, help to receive the blessings of the ancestors, but also to get very clear on what we don't want. I mean, that's really important too. And we're not, we're not obligated to take on anything from the family that's contradictory to our authentic self, period. No matter how, a lot of family cultures are like, family above everything. And, it's just not, it doesn't work that way. Some people, a very good friend of mine, his brother's in prison for 25 years for something he really deserves to belong there. He belongs there. He had to finally get to the point where he didn't cause his brother to commit the crime. He loves his brother, but he also realized his brother needs to stay in prison. But he loves him anyway, right? So it doesn't mean we have to stop loving somebody. We can be compassionate toward them. Also, we are very clear about we don't have to go into codependence and feeling bad for him and isn't that's terrible and all that sort of stuff. It's just, and love them anyway. So in other words, he didn't label his brother a this or a that. He realized his brother's got some issues, some patterns that that lead to illegal behavior, very harmful behavior, and that's his brother's job to figure that out. It's not his. He would help him however he can, but his brother's been trying to get himself and petition and get himself released for a long time, and he doesn't have any standing to do so. It's never been successful, and I'm glad it wasn't, because it's a proof positive his brother's not ready to be accountable. And so we love him anyway. And this friend of mine, he had to take a look at his own behavior. Similar behavior, nowhere near as egregious, but his own similar behavior, and say, well, I got some of that too, but I don't have to go and do what he did, and that sort of thing. So when we do mindfulness and compassion, we talked about paying attention to what comes up, because those are the obstacles in the way of the practice, which is exactly the way it's supposed to work. And that those things are not because we're bad or wrong or stupid. Okay, those are all labels. And it's irrelevant. It just doesn't really mean anything. And when something comes up, whether it has to do with social ineptness, or that we treated somebody poorly, or we took a path in life that we regret, or whatever it is, we were just doing the best that we can. When somebody says, "Oh, I was so stupid back then," well, we weren't stupid back then. We didn't have the tools. We didn't have the screwdriver that we needed, or the electric tool that we needed to deal with what was going on at the time. So we had to use a hammer, and that didn't work, and that made a mess of things. Well, we have more tools today, so we don't have to do that. I was stupid then. We were using all of the tools we had at the time. We just didn't have all the tools. Now we do. So it's really, what would be the right word, absurd to go back and blame ourselves for not having the tools that we have now when we didn't have the tools, and calling ourselves stupid. It just doesn't make any sense. And all that is shame talk. We're just talking ourselves in shame. So when we do that, the first thing that's happening is, to make that possible, is that all these labels are flying around. Another thing about labels is that I think about from time to time, the Zen tradition came from one of the Buddha's talks. He was he lived for years and taught years in a forest somewhere, and he had his disciples around him and such. And as the story goes, in one of his lectures, he stood up and he held a flower in his hand, and that was the entire lecture. He just stood there and held the flower. And from that, Zen arose. If we're really involved in labels, we're going like, what's he doing? That's stupid. He's just holding up a flower. I know, flower. What do you mean? What are you talking about? And it's just a flower. It's a nice flower, but he was talking about what's called suchness. And it's a really difficult concept. I think the closest way to understand it is that suchness is like the nature of things. Suchness is covered up when we use labels. Like in that lecture, if he's just saying, "Oh, that's just a flower," this is stupid. I need to go find another teacher. Or going like, wow, he held it up for some reason. What's that about? What is the flower about? It's like in the email I sent with Thich Nhat Hanh's a cloud and a piece of paper. He's really talking about the interconnectedness of all things. And that things, see things as separate. We walk through a house and there's a table, there's a desk, and there's a this, and there's a that, and there's pictures, and there's this is comfortable, that's not comfortable. We have all these labels, and it's convenient because we need to live in that. We live in this sort of mundane world. But to realize that the suchness of things, the true nature of things, is a whole other dimension. It's like when we see a tree, we go, oh, a tree. Oh, it's kind of a nice tree. It's a tree. And so we start thinking about, and just sit and meditate about, what is a tree really? Why am I attracted to this tree? What about that tree do I find fascinating? And why am I attracted to this? What is this about? And we begin to think about the tree. And I find this amazing because a lot of places where I drive in Dallas, there's a lot of trees. And they're magnificent. And all of a sudden, you realize that they're like 3 stories tall. And I would think, wow, how long has that tree been there? Maybe 90 years, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, who knows? And what's it doing there anyway? What's the tree doing? Why is the tree there? And we realize that it breathes in carbon dioxide and breathes out oxygen. It's there to serve the survival of oxygen-breathing species. Well, how did that happen? You know what I mean? So we keep asking those questions. The more we get more aware we are of its very being, just as it is, then that's where we begin to get in touch with the suchness. And we can begin to get into the being or the nature of a tree. And I don't know if you've had this experience like walking through a forest or a park or something like that and seeing a tree and just being kind of struck by a particular tree. Or we're sitting there on a bench or something and we hear the wind in the tree above us. And we go, wow, that's amazing. I wonder what function that sound. That's an amazing sound. And we realize there's thousands of leaves going like this. Wow, that's amazing. You know what I mean? So it goes, when we let go of the labels, and we start looking at what is this that I'm looking at, then we really begin to open up to things in our environment, and that part of us that opens up is our authentic self, and the part that really is a part of nature just as much as the tree is a part of nature, is that us and the tree have come from the same place. Years ago, I was studying with an herbalist, and we were talking about medication. He said, if you go into the pharmacodynamics of medications, which is a huge tome where all the medications in current use are the pharmacodynamics of that particular drug is listed so that somebody can look it up and find out everything that it does in the body besides what it's supposed to do. And he said, every one of those drugs, take a look at the very last line. You'll find 2 things there. One is it's either toxic to the kidneys or the liver. And the last line is mechanism unknown. You can go through all this stuff about it affects this and affects this, and the enzymes and the dopamine receptors or whatever's going on. And at the very end, it's like, well, we don't really know why that is. And the reason, he said, well, the reason why they're all toxic to the liver or the kidneys, or the skin, because skin's also an excretory organ. The reason why they're toxic is because they're not from our natural system. They're from an unnatural system, and the body doesn't really know how to process them. And thereby, it's like ground glass in the very subtle and fine processes of the body. The body doesn't know how to deal with it. And so it gets stuck in the liver, it does damage to the kidneys, and more or less, and I don't want to denigrate pharmaceuticals in general because they save lives. but it's important to understand the limits of what they can provide, and to understand when we really know something or we really don't. And in the email, I gave the example of, two guys walking through the woods. One is a Native American healer, shaman, and the other is a botanist. Well, they're going to see things very, very differently. The botanist is involved in labeling. This is this sort of plant, this is its family, this is its genus, and there's other plants like this, and there's one of its sisters over there. So they understand all about the labeling, which is important also. But the botanist will never figure out what kind of medicine it is. And the shaman will know intuitively. I was doing a field trip in herbalism with a really wonderful herbalist, and we did this exercise where he picked a plant that none of us knew about. We were out in the middle of the desert, and he picked this plant that none of us knew about, and he said, "I want everybody to get it." And we sat in a circle. Said, "Everybody get into a sort of meditative state. Get into your body and settle down and settle in." And he gave everybody a little bit of this plant. And he said, "Okay, first you got to know, I guarantee you that this is not poisonous. Okay, so don't worry about that part of it." And so he said, when we start, just put a little bit, rub a little bit in your fingers and put it under your tongue, and and be aware of how your body responds. So we did that, and I could feel something happening. I don't remember exactly, but I could feel something happening in my body, like my lungs were responding or something like that, or I forget what it was exactly, but I could tell my body was registering the presence of that particular plant. And so after we had this experience, everybody went around and shared what they experienced, and it was like 90% overlap in what everybody experienced. So we stepped completely outside of the naming of this plant. Can't even call it a plant anymore. This being, this medicine, who knows how to really, outside of terms of convenience, how do you even begin to describe that? There's a plant that has these medicinal properties. And we experienced the nature of that particular plant, which was a healing plant. And we could understand and appreciate and sense its gifts and what it was like as a being. And it was just as much of a being as our kitty cats and ourselves and such, and it has its own meaning and purpose in the larger scheme of things. The idea is that the reason I'm talking about this is because labeling from a spiritual point of view and the contemplative traditions is really important to be aware of, because if we're labeling, we're not doing the practice. We're maybe performing the practice, but we're not involved in the process of the practice. It's like we say, we talk many times that when we're sitting and we're doing the mindfulness meditation, we go, "Oh man, it's a great meditation." Boom, we're not meditating. Or "I feel so good." We're not meditating. Or "Gosh, this isn't working." I'm not meditating. Because we can't capture an experience. We can't. As soon as we label the experience, we've lost it. And so when we do these practices, the mindfulness practice, and the compassion practices, it's the experience. We have to simply let go of labeling and trying to codify things and be involved in the experience. And that's what happens between thoughts, between stimulus and response. That space between stimulus and response, there's no labeling. And as a matter of fact, when we're really solidly in that space, labeling cannot intervene. We just can't. The past and the present, the past and the future cannot enter when we're really solidly in that space. We're just resting in that space. And so if we find ourselves labeling, like, oh, not again, I'm tired, I don't want to meditate, or whatever, that to be aware that we're labeling and we're seeing something as a whatever blank. You can use this thesaurus for an appropriate term. So labeling is an obstacle to all spiritual practices. And this is the reason why I'm talking about it today. And to know that is really important. So, I'll tell you one more story. There's a friend of mine, we were talking about this a long time ago. He was a Buddhist, and we were talking about meditation, and, how do you know you're making any progress and all that sort of stuff. And he said a good friend of his was meditating, and he was he was a meditator, a long-time meditator, and he was in a workshop with a teacher, Rinpoche, and he had a personal interview, and he said to the Rinpoche, I've been meditating for 14 years, and I don't think anything has changed. And the Rinpoche looked at him and thought for a second. He said, 14 years? Not so long. It's okay. Which is exactly what he needed to hear. Don't worry about it. If you're trying to figure out whether you're better at it today than you were yesterday, you're not really meditating. And so we just let go and let stuff happen. And the more stuff happens, and we're aware and present for it happening, that is and this is why we don't even notice that we're changing a lot of times in spiritual progress. We go about doing stuff and we don't really know whether it's really helping or not. That's the best attitude. Because if we're doing the practices without calculation and without naming, that's the best method. Just letting it, whatever's happening, just let it be. And then we'll find out, as we do the practices, we'll notice that we begin to change. Our outlook will begin to change, or our understanding will begin to change, or our relationships will begin to change, because we're changing fundamentally as a result of the experience. If we're labeling things all the time, we're not learning, we're just standing still. We're not really changing. So what I thought we'd do today is an extended mindfulness practice, and then move into a compassion practice. So everybody finding a comfortable spot, position, where the body can be still without having to move any muscles. And we'll begin. And allowing ourselves just to settle down. And settling into the body. The body is like our home base. Wherever our mind's floating around, our body's just right here, right now. And settling in. Getting to be aware of the body as a whole. And if you need to, sort of wiggling your toes and noticing the points of contact with the chair or the floor or wherever you're sitting. And seeing if you can simply be fully present with and in the body. And just experiencing the body as it is. and inviting our mind and our emotions to join us in the stillness of the body. And the mind may still be jumping around, and that's okay. I mean, it's just what the brain likes to do. Our brains have been trained to do that. So each time our awareness is seduced and wanders off with a thought, just recognize that the thought is a thought, and release it and come back to the present moment. And noticing that after a thought leaves and we return, before another thought arises, there's a space. Even though it may only be a second or two. Appreciating that space as it is. And each time we notice our awareness wandering off, simply recognizing that and releasing the thought. And returning our awareness to the present moment. And accepting the activity of the brain just as it is. It is neither good nor bad. And it provides us the opportunity to be aware of what really goes on in our mind. And when we do this, we get a special awareness of our awareness. Because when we get caught up in a thought or an emotion, our awareness becomes fused with the label. And when we pause and realize a thought is just a thought, our awareness separates from the label, and we return our awareness to its proper place, right here, right now. And repeating this as we need. The brain has been trained to throw out all kinds of thoughts and emotions and attract our awareness away from its proper place. And each time we simply let it go and return our awareness to right here, right now. And each time we do that, our awareness becomes more and more settled in the present moment. So when a thought or an emotion arises, we don't have to even label that. We go, oh, and let it go. And our awareness easily relocates back to right here, right now. And over again, without judgment or criticism, without labeling. Each time a thought or emotion arises, a scenario, could be even an old wound of some kind or a difficult person. It doesn't matter, they're all just thoughts. And noticing the experience when our awareness comes back to the present moment. And we're back in this moment called now in our body, and what that feels like, even if it's just for a second or two. And in this process, we kind of get used to it. We just do it as it occurs. So that there's no good or bad or anything. This is just the way our brains work. And we get to intervene and be intentional about our awareness. And allowing ourselves to settle into this present moment awareness as fully as we can, even if it's only for a second or two. And even though the process is repetitive, sort of settling into the process. That when a thought or a feeling arises, simply recognizing, releasing, and returning. That is just the simple task at hand. Allowing ourselves to touch and be in this present moment where our awareness is just being. And getting used to the process over and over. Bringing our awareness back to right here, right now. We may notice at times our mind tries harder to grab our awareness and run away with it. That's just the nature of the brain. When we recognize that, we just let it go. Come back to the nest, right here, right now. And each time we let go, we understand a little better each time what this is about. It's just about letting go. And now bringing to mind a tree. It may be one that you know or that you don't know. It may be a symbolic tree like the tree of life. It may be large or small. It would be a winter tree or a summer tree or a fruit tree, whatever comes up. But whatever arises, bringing it fully into mind. Bringing it into presence in your mind. Bringing your awareness to it fully. And maintaining, if your mind wanders or begins to think about the tree or apply labels, simply letting go of those conceptualizations and coming back to the experience of the tree. And just sitting with the tree. And experiencing the tree. And observing how we respond and resonate with the tree. And allowing ourselves to resonate with this tree. And feel and be aware of the similarities. And becoming aware of the similarities, resonating with them. And settling into this awareness of similarities. And feeling a completeness in this resonance. A realization of this resonance, this connection, this sameness. And allowing the fullness of this experience come to fruition. And its natural conclusion for the moment. And allowing the body to absorb this experience like a sponge absorbs water. So that when the bell rings again, you can bring this with you as you go about your day and come back to it at any time.